In 2014, a hunter made a choice that violated every rule of the wilderness. He didn't pull the trigger. He reached out his hand. At the bottom of a Montana ravine lay something that shouldn't exist. An injured Sasquatch infant, no more than 3 feet tall, trapped under fallen rocks. Its leg was clearly broken. Blood matted the dark fur around several deep cuts. Those eyes held intelligence the hunter had never seen in any animal. It was looking at him like it understood he could choose to help or walk away. 40 years of hunting experience told him to document the find and leave. His survival instinct screamed at him to run. Instead, he climbed down into that ravine and saved the creature's life. That single act of compassion triggered the most extraordinary human-cryptid relationship ever documented. For 10 years, this hunter maintained contact with an entire Sasquatch family. The bond deepened into something that challenged his very identity as a human being. It ended when the psychological cost became too much to bear. What happens when you cross the line between human and cryptid worlds? The answer will disturb you. Be honest, if you were deep in the wilderness and found something that shouldn't exist, would you reach out to help, or would you keep walking? Tell me your choice in the comments. The rescue that started everything. October 15th, 2014. Elk season in the Bitterroot Mountains. The hunter we'll call David had been tracking a bull elk for 3 days when he heard something that stopped him cold. Not the bugle of an elk or the crack of breaking branches. This was different. A high-pitched whimpering, almost like a human child in distress. Following the sound led him to a steep ravine where recent rockfall had created a natural trap. At the bottom, partially buried under loose stones, was something that shouldn't exist. A juvenile Sasquatch, no more than 3 feet tall, covered in dark, reddish-brown hair. Its left leg was clearly broken. Blood matted the fur around several deep cuts. The creature's eyes locked onto his, and David later wrote in his journal, "Those eyes held intelligence I'd never seen in any animal. It was looking at me like it understood I could choose to help or walk away." David climbed down into that ravine. The infant didn't struggle as he approached, which he found unsettling. Most injured animals fight when cornered. This one seemed to recognize his intention to help. But first, David had to solve the problem that had trapped the creature in the first place. One massive boulder, roughly the size of a refrigerator, had rolled against a smaller rock, creating a wedge that pinned the infant's torso. The creature could breathe, but any attempt to move would shift the weight and potentially crush its ribcage. David wedged his hunting knife into the gap between the rocks, using it as a lever. The blade bent under the pressure, nearly snapping. He grabbed a sturdy branch and tried again, putting his full body weight behind the effort. The keystone rock shifted slightly, just enough to free the infant's chest. The creature gasped, taking its first full breath in what might have been hours. Using techniques he'd learned as a military medic decades earlier, David stabilized the broken leg with branches and paracord. He cleaned the wounds with water from his canteen. The creature's body temperature ran significantly higher than human normal, around 102 degrees Fahrenheit. Getting the infant out of the ravine required a makeshift pulley system using his climbing rope. The creature weighed approximately 60 pounds, far heavier than its size suggested. When David picked it up, it felt incredibly heavy. He realized its bones were much thicker and stronger than a human's. He made a shelter using his emergency tarp and sleeping bag, creating a windbreak against the October cold. The infant accepted water, but refused the energy bars David offered. Instead, it gestured towards certain plants growing nearby. Huckleberries, wild onions, and something David didn't recognize, but later identified as beargrass roots. The creature's dietary knowledge was sophisticated, selecting only specific parts of each plant. The creature didn't just eat, it selected specific medicinal roots. Does that sound like animal instinct to you, or something much closer to human knowledge? On the second night, David noticed he was being watched. Movement in the tree line caught his peripheral vision repeatedly, but whenever he looked directly, nothing was there. The feeling of being observed grew stronger. His military training told him something large was circling his position, staying just beyond visual range. The infant seemed aware of this presence too, occasionally making soft vocalizations toward the darkness. By the third day, the creature's leg was showing signs of healing that defied medical understanding. Swelling had reduced dramatically. The cuts were scabbing over cleanly. David faced his crucial decision: attempt to transport the infant to authorities or return it to whatever was watching from the forest. His journal entry from October 18th reads, "I can feel them out there, plural, at least 2, maybe more. The little one keeps looking toward the ridge and making sounds I can't describe. Not quite animal, not quite human. I think they're waiting to see what I'll do. I think this is some kind of test." That evening, David made his choice. He carried the infant to the edge of the clearing and gently set it down. Within minutes, a massive silhouette emerged from the tree line. First contact, the return visit. The science tells us the infant was extraordinary. But for David, the real revelation wasn't in the bone density or the rock traps. It was in the shadow that now detached itself from the Bitterroot tree line. What emerged from that tree line defied every assumption David had about cryptid encounters. The adult Sasquatch stood nearly 8 feet tall, covered in the same reddish-brown hair as the infant, but with silver streaking around the face and shoulders. It moved with deliberate caution, each step calculated to minimize sound despite its massive frame. David estimated its weight at over 400 pounds based on how deeply its feet pressed into the soft forest floor. The creature's approach pattern revealed sophisticated intelligence. It didn't move directly toward David and the infant. Instead, it circled the clearing, staying approximately 50 yards away, studying the situation from multiple angles. Its head moved in sweeping motions, clearly analyzing scent trails and visual cues. David later wrote, "It was conducting reconnaissance like a trained soldier. Every movement had purpose." The body language spoke volumes. The Sasquatch's shoulders remained relaxed, not the hunched posture of an aggressive animal. Its arms hung naturally at its sides rather than being positioned defensively. Most telling were its eyes, which maintained steady contact with David's without the direct stare that typically signals threat behavior in primates. This was assessment, not aggression. After 20 minutes of observation, the adult finally approached. It stopped exactly 10 feet from where David knelt beside the infant. The size differential was overwhelming. David, who stood 6 feet tall and weighed 200 pounds, felt dwarfed by the creature's presence. But what struck him most was the complete absence of fear in the adult's demeanor. This wasn't a panicked parent rushing to rescue its young. This was a calculated evaluation of David's character and intentions. The reunion between adult and infant lasted only moments. The larger creature gently examined the improvised splint on the young one's leg, its massive fingers surprisingly delicate as they probed the healing wounds. It made soft vocalizations, almost purring sounds that the infant responded to with similar tones. David described the exchange as a conversation I couldn't understand, but could feel. What happened next changed everything. Instead of immediately departing with the infant, the adult Sasquatch began gathering objects from around the clearing. 3 smooth river stones, each about the size of a baseball. A perfectly straight branch, approximately 2 feet long. Several pine cones arranged in a specific pattern. These items were carefully placed in a neat pile exactly where David had been sitting during his 3-day vigil. As the pair disappeared into the forest, David looked down at the spot where he'd been sitting. He expected to find nothing but flattened grass. Instead, he found a message that proved these creatures understood the concept of debt. The message was unmistakable: payment for services rendered. As the pair disappeared into the forest, David noticed something that would become a pattern over the next decade. The adult paused at the tree line and looked back. Not a casual glance, but sustained eye contact that lasted nearly 30 seconds. David interpreted this as acknowledgement, possibly even invitation. Within a week of returning home, David discovered the first stone stack on his property. 7 river stones, balanced in an impossible tower on his front porch. No human could have placed them there without his knowledge. His motion-activated security cameras showed no activity, yet the stones appeared overnight. The pattern had begun. What started as a rescue had evolved into something unprecedented: regular contact between human and cryptid. David had crossed a line that few humans ever approach, and there would be no going back. David expected that to be the end of it, a once-in-a-lifetime encounter. He was wrong. That first exchange of stones wasn't a farewell. It was an opening move in a decade-long game of trust. Years 1 to 3. Building trust through ritual. The stone stacks were just the beginning. Over the following 3 years, David documented the most sophisticated interspecies communication system ever recorded between humans and cryptids. What emerged was a complex ritual exchange that revealed Sasquatch intelligence operating on levels that challenged everything we thought we knew about non-human cognition. The gift system developed its own internal logic. David would leave items on a specific stump at the edge of his property: hand tools, canned food, sometimes books or magazines. Within days, he'd find carefully selected natural objects in return. Not random forest debris, but deliberately chosen items that demonstrated understanding of human preferences. Polished stones with unusual patterns. Perfectly preserved bird feathers arranged in geometric designs. Hand-carved wooden objects that showed tool use and artistic sensibility. The sophistication escalated rapidly. By month 6, David received a leather pouch filled with medicinal plants native to the region. When he researched the contents, every single plant had documented healing properties. Willow bark for pain relief, echinacea for immune support, bear root for digestive issues. Someone with extensive botanical knowledge had assembled a natural pharmacy specifically for human physiology. The seasonal visitation schedule that emerged revealed long-term planning capabilities. Spring visits focused on territory boundaries, with the Sasquatch family marking specific trees and rock formations around David's property. Summer brought teaching exchanges, where adult creatures demonstrated tracking techniques and foraging strategies. Fall visits centered on food sharing, with elaborate meals consumed together in forest clearings. Winter contact was minimal but consistent, usually involving gift exchanges during the coldest months when resources were scarce. David's psychological adaptation during this period was remarkable. His journal entries show a gradual shift from scientific observation to genuine emotional connection. By year 2, he was planning his hunting seasons around the visitation schedule. He modified his property to create better meeting spaces, clearing small areas in the forest and building simple shelters that could accommodate both human and cryptid physiology. The shared meals became legendary. David would bring prepared human food while the Sasquatch family provided foraged items and freshly caught fish. The adult male, who David began calling Elder in his notes, demonstrated cooking techniques using heated stones and natural wrapping materials. The food preparation was collaborative, with each species contributing their specialized knowledge. One incident from year 3 cemented their bond permanently. David was tracking an injured deer when he encountered a mother black bear with cubs. The situation turned dangerous quickly when the bear perceived David as a threat to her young. As the bear charged, Elder emerged from the tree line and positioned himself between David and the attacking animal. The confrontation lasted only seconds, but the bear's retreat was immediate and absolute. Elder had risked his own safety to protect David from a predator that posed no threat to Sasquatch. The audio recordings from this period captured developing communication patterns that defied conventional understanding. David learned to recognize different infrasound frequencies that corresponded to specific meanings. Low, rumbling tones indicated contentment or approval. Sharp, staccato bursts meant danger or urgency. Extended harmonic sequences seemed to convey complex information about weather patterns, animal movements, and territorial changes. By year 3, David's hunting practices had completely transformed. He no longer hunted alone, instead coordinating with the Sasquatch family to manage wildlife populations in their shared territory. They developed joint strategies for tracking elk herds and identifying sick or injured animals that needed to be removed from the population. The partnership was so effective that David's success rate increased dramatically while his actual hunting time decreased. The psychological cost was already becoming apparent. David's human relationships suffered as he struggled to explain his frequent absences and behavioral changes. His family noticed his increasing preference for solitude and his reluctance to discuss his activities in the mountains. He was living between two worlds, and the strain was beginning to show. But the bond continued deepening, setting the stage for breakthroughs that would challenge everything we thought we knew about interspecies communication. The Infrasound Breakthrough, years 4 to 6. By year 4, the relationship hit a wall. David could see them, and he could feed them, but he couldn't understand them. That's when he realized the most important part of their world was something he literally couldn't hear. Year 4 marked the moment David stopped being just an observer and became something unprecedented, a human participant in Sasquatch communication networks. The breakthrough came when he made a decision that would fundamentally alter the trajectory of their relationship. He began systematically recording their interactions using specialized equipment designed to capture subsonic frequencies. The recording setup was sophisticated. David invested in ultrasonic microphones capable of detecting frequencies below human hearing range, paired with spectrum analysis software that could visualize sound waves in real time. But first came the Oz effect, David's term for the eerie phenomenon that preceded every infrasound session. The forest would fall into unnatural silence. Not the comfortable quiet of evening, but a oppressive, watchful stillness where even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Birds would stop mid-song. Insects would cease their buzzing. Even his own heartbeat seemed muffled, as if the air itself had thickened around him. Then, without warning, the invisible pressure would hit a sensation like standing too close to massive speakers, playing music he couldn't hear, but his entire body could feel. Have you ever been in the woods and felt that Oz effect, where the world goes completely silent and the air feels heavy? If you've experienced that, I want to hear your story below. If that description of the Oz effect gave you a chill, hit the like button. It helps us reach more people who need to hear David's warning. This isn't just science, it's a survival guide. If you understand these subsonic patterns, you'll know exactly when you're being watched, long before your eyes ever see a shadow. Pay attention to this next part. The infrasound patterns captured on his equipment were extraordinary. Elder and his family communicated using frequencies between 5 and 20 hertz, well below the 20 hertz threshold of human hearing. These weren't random vocalizations. The patterns showed clear structure, repetition, and variation that indicated complex linguistic capabilities. The expert analysis David commissioned validated his findings in ways that shocked the scientific community. Dr. Sarah Chen, a bioacoustics researcher at the University of Montana, spent months analyzing the recordings. Her conclusion was clear. The infrasound patterns showed language as complex as dolphin communication. The way the sounds changed and repeated showed it was a real language. It had its own rules and meanings, just like the way we speak. But Dr. Sarah Chen's analysis uncovered something the human mind couldn't fabricate. A repeating 12 Hz signature that perfectly matched the natural resonance frequency of the Bitterroot Valley itself. The Sasquatch weren't just using infrasound to communicate, they were using the landscape as an amplifier, turning the entire mountain range into a transmission system. The physical effects on David were immediate and intense. Exposure to prolonged infrasound sessions triggered severe headaches that lasted for hours. His hands would shake uncontrollably during and after encounters. Most disturbing were the emotional responses that seemed to bypass his conscious mind entirely. Certain frequency combinations induced overwhelming feelings of peace and contentment. Others triggered primal fear responses that left him nauseated and disoriented. The breakthrough moment came in month 14 of the recording project. David was analyzing a particularly complex infrasound sequence when he noticed his own body was unconsciously responding to the patterns. His breathing had synchronized with the rhythm. His heart rate had adjusted to match the frequency modulations. Without realizing it, he had begun humming in harmony with subsonic tones he couldn't consciously hear. That evening, during their regular meeting, David attempted something that bordered on madness. He tried to replicate the infrasound patterns using his own voice, dropping his vocal register as low as possible and adding harmonic overtones. The response from Elder was immediate and unmistakable. The massive creature's posture shifted from relaxed observation to intense focus. For the first time in their relationship, Elder approached within arm's reach of David. What followed was the first documented case of bidirectional human-cryptid communication using infrasound. Elder began producing specific frequency patterns while watching David's responses. When David successfully mimicked a pattern, Elder would repeat it with variations, clearly teaching more complex structures. The sessions lasted hours, with David's recording equipment capturing every nuance of this unprecedented linguistic exchange. The learning curve was steep and painful. David's throat suffered constant strain from attempting to produce frequencies his vocal cords weren't designed for. His sinuses became chronically inflamed from the pressure changes. But his ability to interpret and respond to infrasound improved dramatically. By year 5, he could distinguish between dozens of different meaning categories: weather warnings, territorial markers, emotional states, and even complex narratives about past events. At this point, skeptics usually dismiss everything as infrasound-induced hallucinations. The theory is compelling. Subsonic frequencies can trigger altered states, false memories, even phantom conversations with imaginary beings. David's deteriorating mental state would seem to support this explanation. The recordings revealed something else that fundamentally changed David's understanding of Sasquatch society. The infrasound communications weren't limited to his immediate contacts. Elder's vocalizations were being answered by other sources across the mountain range, sometimes from distances exceeding 20 miles. David was witnessing a communication network that spanned the entire regional ecosystem. The technology proved its worth in ways David never anticipated. During a late evening recording session in year 5, his equipment detected the approaching vibrations of a mountain lion, 15 minutes before Elder showed any awareness of the threat. The spectrum analyzer lit up with the cat's stalking patterns, the rhythmic pad of paws, the pause and advance hunting behavior, all captured in subsonic frequencies that David's trained ear could now interpret. When he alerted Elder using their established warning signals, the massive creature's response was immediate gratitude, mixed with what David interpreted as respect. For the first time, the human partner had contributed vital survival information to the relationship. By year 6, David had become fluent enough in Sasquatch infrasound to participate in group conversations involving multiple family members. The psychological toll was becoming severe, but the scientific implications were staggering. He had proven that human-cryptid communication was not only possible, but could reach levels of complexity that challenged our understanding of intelligence itself. The stage was set for the deepest phase of their relationship, when the line between human and cryptid worlds would blur beyond recognition. The deepest connection, years 7 to 8. Years 7 and 8 represent the pinnacle of human-cryptid interaction ever documented. During this period, David achieved something that borders on the impossible: full integration into Sasquatch social structures while maintaining his human identity. The psychological and physical demands were extraordinary, but the insights gained fundamentally changed our understanding of what interspecies cooperation could look like. The hunting partnership that developed defied every conventional understanding of predator behavior and territory management. Elder began including David in family hunting expeditions, not as an observer, but as an active participant. These weren't casual foraging trips. David was witnessing coordinated hunts involving multiple adult Sasquatch working together to take down large prey, including elk and occasionally black bear. The family used sophisticated communication systems, with different members positioned at strategic points across several square miles of terrain. They employed complex herding strategies, using natural geography to funnel prey into predetermined kill zones. David's role evolved from observer to coordinator, using his human tools and weapons to complement their natural abilities. Elder taught David to read forest signs that human hunters had never documented, subtle changes in vegetation patterns that indicated animal movement from days earlier, scent marking systems used by various prey species to communicate territorial boundaries. Most remarkably, Elder demonstrated the ability to predict weather changes up to a week in advance based on animal behavior patterns that were invisible to human observation. Territory management became a collaborative effort spanning hundreds of square miles. The Sasquatch family maintained detailed mental maps of every water source, feeding ground, and shelter location across their range. David contributed human knowledge of seasonal patterns, hunting regulations, and potential human intrusion points. Together, they developed strategies to minimize human-wildlife conflicts while maximizing the health of prey populations. The psychological toll on David during this period was severe, but initially masked by the extraordinary nature of his experiences. His journal entries from year 7 show increasing difficulty relating to human society. He spent weeks at a time living in the forest with the Sasquatch family, learning to sleep in natural shelters and subsist on foraged foods. The emotional cost crystallized in a single, devastating moment. David's sister called to tell him his nephew had been born 3 weeks early, while David was deep in the forest coordinating a complex elk hunt with Elder's family. He had promised to be there for the birth. Instead, he learned about it through a voicemail left on a phone he hadn't checked in 12 days. When he finally returned to visit, holding his week-old nephew for the first time, the infant wouldn't stop crying in his arms. His sister later told him he smelled wild and that his presence seemed to disturb the baby. David's human relationships deteriorated as he struggled to explain his prolonged absences and behavioral changes. David missed the birth of his nephew to stay in the forest. At what point does a fascination with the unknown become an obsession that costs too much? The breakthrough moment came when Elder brought his extended family to meet David. For the first time, David encountered the full social structure of their community: 3 adult pairs, 7 juveniles of various ages, and 2 elderly individuals who appeared to hold positions of authority within the group. The meeting took place in a hidden valley that served as their primary gathering place, a location David estimated had been used by Sasquatch for generations based on the permanent structures and tool caches he observed. What David witnessed in that hidden valley destroys the idea that the wilderness is empty. You're about to see the social structure of a civilization that has lived alongside us in total secrecy for centuries. The social dynamics David witnessed challenged every assumption about cryptid intelligence and organization. The elderly Sasquatch demonstrated advanced problem-solving abilities, using tools to modify their environment in ways that showed long-term planning. They had developed sophisticated food preservation techniques, creating underground storage systems that kept meat fresh for extended periods. Their knowledge of medicinal plants exceeded anything David had encountered in human herbalism. The family interactions revealed emotional complexity that paralleled human relationships. David observed grieving behaviors when an elderly member died, including what appeared to be funeral rituals involving the entire community. He witnessed teaching sessions where adults passed specialized knowledge to juveniles through demonstration and repetition. Most remarkably, he documented play behaviors among the young that showed creativity, humor, and social bonding identical to human childhood development. The integration reached its peak when David was invited to participate in what he could only describe as a naming ceremony. The family had developed a specific infrasound signature for him, a complex frequency pattern that served as his identity within their communication network. From that point forward, David could be summoned from distances exceeding 10 miles when the family needed his assistance or participation in group activities. But the deeper David integrated into their world, the more he lost connection with his own species. The psychological cost was becoming unsustainable, setting the stage for the crisis that would ultimately force him to choose between two worlds that were never meant to intersect. It was the pinnacle of his life. But in the world of the Sasquatch, there is no such thing as a casual observer. Integration requires total surrender, and in year 9, the family decided it was time for David to pay his dues. The warning signs, year 9. The honeymoon was over. In a matter of weeks, Elder went from guardian to jailer. The psychological deterioration is captured in David's own words, fragments from journal entries that read less like research notes and more like a hostage diary. October 3rd. Elder won't let me leave the valley alone anymore. He follows me everywhere, even to the latrine area. When I tried to hike back to my truck yesterday, he blocked the trail and wouldn't move for 6 hours. October 15th. I think they're making decisions about me without including me. The infrasound conversations happen when I'm sleeping now. I wake up feeling like I've agreed to something I can't remember. October 28th. I tried to call my sister today. Elder destroyed my satellite phone. He's never shown aggression toward my equipment before. Something has changed. I don't think I'm a partner anymore. I think I'm property. The territorial aggression had never existed before. Elder began displaying hostile behavior toward other wildlife in ways that violated the natural balance they'd maintained for years. He would chase off deer herds from traditional feeding grounds, not for hunting purposes, but seemingly to assert dominance. The collaborative territory management they'd developed devolved into something approaching conquest. The aggression extended to human presence as well. David recorded multiple incidents where Elder and his family would stalk human hikers and hunters who entered their expanded territory. These weren't the careful observation patterns David had grown accustomed to. This was intimidation, with the Sasquatch deliberately revealing themselves to frighten humans away. David found evidence of systematic harassment, destroyed campsites, scattered equipment, and terrified witnesses reporting encounters with creatures that seemed almost malevolent in their intent. For 8 years, David felt like a partner. But the final journal entries reveal the truth. He wasn't a friend anymore. He was an asset. This is the warning every researcher ignores. Contact doesn't just change your world, it rewires your brain. You need to understand the psychological price David paid, because it could happen to anyone who looks too closely into the tree line. David's own psychological state was deteriorating rapidly. He began interpreting normal human interactions as threats to his relationship with the Sasquatch family. When his brother visited unexpectedly, David became convinced he was being surveilled by government agencies. When neighbors asked about his frequent absences, he saw conspiracy rather than concern. The boundary between species was blurring in dangerous ways. David started exhibiting behaviors that mimicked Sasquatch patterns. He would spend hours arranging stones in complex patterns around his property, creating territorial markers that served no human purpose. His diet shifted almost entirely to foraged foods, even when conventional options were available. Most disturbing, he began sleeping outdoors exclusively, claiming that indoor environments felt unnatural and confining. The breaking point came when other humans discovered evidence of the relationship. A group of hikers found one of the collaborative hunting sites David and Elder had established, complete with human tools integrated into Sasquatch infrastructure. The discovery triggered a local investigation that brought unwanted attention to David's activities. Wildlife officials began questioning his hunting patterns and extended forest stays. Local law enforcement received reports of a hermit living in the mountains who might pose a danger to outdoor enthusiasts. Family pressure mounted as David's behavior became increasingly erratic. His sister documented a disturbing conversation where David insisted that human society was fundamentally flawed and that the Sasquatch family represented a superior way of living. He spoke about humans as an invasive species that needed to be managed rather than accommodated. The final warning came from Elder himself. During what would be their last normal interaction, the massive creature exhibited behavior David had never witnessed before. Elder approached him with obvious distress, making infrasound vocalizations that David interpreted as warnings or pleas. The frequency patterns were unlike anything in their established communication system, carrying emotional content that felt desperate and urgent. David's recording equipment captured the exchange, but his analysis revealed something terrifying. The infrasound patterns weren't just communication anymore. They were commands, and David's body was responding automatically. His heart rate synchronized with Elder's vocalizations without conscious control. His movements began mirroring the creature's posture and gestures. The boundary between human and cryptid consciousness was dissolving, and David was losing the ability to distinguish between his own thoughts and the influence of infrasound manipulation. The stage was set for a final confrontation between two worlds that had become too intertwined to coexist safely. The final year, when everything changed. Year 10 began with David living more as cryptid than human. He had moved permanently into the forest, abandoning his house except for occasional supply runs. His appearance had changed dramatically. His hair had grown long and matted, his beard unkempt. His clothes were a mixture of human garments and natural materials gifted by the Sasquatch family. Most disturbing, his communication had shifted almost entirely to infrasound, with human speech becoming increasingly difficult and painful for him to produce. The event that forced everything to change happened on a cold February morning. David was participating in what had become a daily ritual, a group infrasound session where the entire Sasquatch family would communicate for hours about territory status, weather patterns, and resource availability. During these sessions, David's consciousness would merge almost completely with the group mind, his individual human thoughts becoming secondary to the collective cryptid awareness. During a routine morning session in the final year, the infrasound didn't just bring peace. It brought a broadcast from across the entire mountain range. And for the first time, David understood exactly what the Sasquatch were planning for the humans nearby. But this morning was different. As David synchronized with the infrasound patterns, he began receiving information that chilled him to his core. The family wasn't just communicating about their immediate territory anymore. They were coordinating with other Sasquatch groups across multiple states, planning something that David's fragmenting human consciousness recognized as deeply dangerous. This wasn't just one family. David uncovered a broadcast that proves the rules of the forest are changing everywhere. If you live near the high timber, this isn't just a story, it's a situational report on a growing coalition you weren't supposed to know about. The Infrasound network revealed a growing cryptid coalition that viewed human expansion as an existential threat. David heard discussions about systematic intimidation campaigns, coordinated efforts to drive humans away from traditional cryptid territories, and most terrifying, debates about whether humans like David could serve as useful assets in a larger conflict between species. The realization hit him like a physical blow. He wasn't Elder's partner anymore. He was a tool being shaped for purposes he couldn't fully comprehend. The decade-long relationship had been manipulation on a scale that challenged everything he thought he understood about their bond. Do you think Elder was ever truly David's friend, or was he just grooming a human asset from the very beginning? Type friend or asset in the comments right now. The psychological break was immediate and devastating. David's human consciousness reasserted itself with violent force, rejecting the infrasound influence that had been gradually consuming his identity. The physical withdrawal was agonizing. His body had become dependent on the regular infrasound exposure, and cutting himself off triggered symptoms resembling severe drug withdrawal, tremors, hallucinations, and crushing depression. Elder's response to David's psychological rebellion was swift and terrifying. The massive creature appeared at David's forest shelter within hours, bringing several family members in what could only be described as an intervention attempt. But this wasn't the gentle, intelligent being David had known for a decade. This was something desperate and dangerous, using infrasound frequencies that felt like physical assault rather than communication. The confrontation lasted 6 hours and nearly killed David. Elder's attempts to re-establish infrasound control triggered seizures and cardiac irregularities that left David unconscious for extended periods. When he finally regained awareness, he understood with perfect clarity that he had to choose: surrender his human identity completely or sever the relationship forever. The final recorded interaction between David and Elder took place 3 days later. David had managed to reach his abandoned house and retrieve his recording equipment one last time. The audio captures a conversation conducted entirely in infrasound, with David using every technique he'd learned to communicate his decision to leave permanently. Elder's response was unlike anything David had ever heard from him. The infrasound patterns carried emotional content that felt like grief, rage, and something approaching betrayal. For nearly an hour, Elder pleaded with David to reconsider, using frequency combinations that triggered every positive memory they'd shared over the previous decade. But David held firm. His final message to Elder, translated from infrasound to human language, was simple: "I choose to remain human." The aftermath was swift and brutal. David's family, alerted by his 3-day absence, found him in his house in a state of complete psychological collapse. Emergency psychiatric evaluation led to immediate hospitalization and months of intensive therapy. His property was sold while he recovered, and he was relocated to a different state where the memories couldn't reach him. The forest where they'd shared a decade of impossible connection now stands empty of both human and cryptid presence. Elder's family disappeared shortly after David's departure, leaving behind only the stone stacks and tool caches that testified to their extraordinary relationship. David's current state remains fragile but stable. The infrasound withdrawal took 2 years to resolve completely, and he still experiences phantom frequencies during times of stress. He's learned to live with the knowledge that he crossed a line between worlds that few humans ever approach, and fewer still survive intact. The choice that defines us all. David made his choice in 2014: help instead of harm. But that single decision in a Montana ravine created ripples that extend far beyond one man's relationship with the unknown. His story reveals that we are all guardians now, whether we realize it or not. Every time you hike into the backcountry, you carry the same choice David faced. Will you approach the unexplained with respect or exploitation? Will you protect the secrets you discover or expose them for profit? The difference between David and most of us isn't the encounter itself. It's what he chose to do when faced with something that challenged everything he believed about the world. The Bitterroot Mountains aren't unique. From the Hudson Valley to the Olympic Peninsula, from the Bridgewater Triangle to the deep woods of East Texas, similar relationships are playing out right now. Guardians who've learned that some truths are too dangerous to share publicly, but too important to ignore completely. They form a network of protectors, documenting and preserving evidence while keeping the locations safe from those who would exploit them. David's decade of contact proves these beings possess intelligence, culture, and capabilities that rival our own. But more importantly, it proves they're watching us, evaluating us, deciding whether individual humans can be trusted with knowledge that could change everything. The infrasound signatures David recorded continue to echo across the western states. Elder's family may have disappeared, but the network remains active. Other families are still making contact, still choosing specific humans to test, still deciding whether our species deserves partnership or needs management. You are part of this choice now. By watching this investigation, by learning about David's experience, you've become a keeper of knowledge that comes with responsibility. The question isn't whether these encounters are real. The question is what kind of guardian you'll choose to be. Will you treat the wilderness with the reverence it demands? Will you recognize that intelligence takes many forms and deserves respect regardless of species? Will you understand that some secrets exist not to be revealed, but to be protected? David's story is one of many. In our next investigation, we'll take you to the Mogollon Rim of Arizona, where a different kind of guardian has maintained contact with a Sasquatch family for over 15 years. Unlike David, this guardian never tried to leave. The relationship continues to this day, and the psychological effects are even more dramatic. If you think David's story was intense, you need to see what happened on the Mogollon Rim, where a guardian has stayed with a family for 15 years and has started to lose the ability to speak English entirely. Click here to see that investigation next. If you believe these secrets deserve to be protected, hit that subscribe button. We're building a network of guardians who aren't afraid of the truth, and we need you in it. These stories need to be preserved, but they also need to be guarded by people who understand their true value. The choice is yours. What kind of guardian will you be?